Sherlock Holmes and the Murder. Nobody committed Chapter 1 shall never forget the case that so thoroughly defied logic. A crime so paradoxical that even Holmes, at first glance, hesitated before offering his customary deductions. It began on a bitterly cold evening in late November, when a frantic messenger arrived at 221B Baker Street, his face pale and drawn beneath the flickering gaslights. "Mr. Holmes! Dr. Watson!" he gasped, scarcely able to catch his breath. "Inspector Lestrade sends for you at once. A murder! An impossible murder!" Holmes, who had been reclining in his chair, steepled fingers pressed against his lips, slowly opened his eyes. "An impossible murder, you say? Intriguing. Watson, fetch your coat. We mustn't keep Scotland Yard waiting." With that, we were swiftly on our way, a hansom cab rattling through the fog-drenched streets of London. Holmes remained silent for much of the journey, his keen eyes glinting with something between curiosity and amusement. "You seem entertained by this, Holmes," I remarked, pulling my coat tighter against the chill. "Entertainment, Watson, is a luxury for the idle. What I feel at present is something far more enticing: curiosity. An impossible crime suggests an error in perception, and errors, my dear fellow, are meant to be corrected." We arrived at Wyndham House, an imposing manor in the heart of Kensington. The moment we stepped inside, the air was thick with tension. Servants huddled in frightened whispers, while uniformed officers moved about with grim determination. At the centre of it all stood Inspector Lestrade, his normally self-assured expression betraying clear frustration. "Holmes, thank heavens you're here," he said, his usual gruffness tinged with unease. "I'd wager even you will struggle with this one." "Then let us hope your wager is misplaced, Lestrade," Holmes said smoothly. "What do we have?" Lestrade led us through a set of heavy oak doors and into a study, where the sheer impossibility of the scene struck me at once. A man lay dead upon the plush carpet, his body perfectly still, his expression eerily peaceful. There was no sign of violence, no wound, and not a single drop of blood. Yet beside him, upon the desk, stood a chessboard, its pieces arranged in the middle of a match. "What killed him?" I murmured, stepping closer. "That, Doctor, is the problem," Lestrade admitted, his hands on his hips. "There's no sign of struggle, no poison, no marks, nothing at all to suggest foul play. And yet we know he was murdered." Holmes crouched beside the body, his gaze sharpening. "How do we know this?" Lestrade exhaled. "Because the doors and windows were locked from the inside. Nobody could have come in or out." "But," he hesitated, then continued, "the butler swears he heard voices. 2 voices. A conversation was happening in this room, and then silence. When he forced his way in, this is what he found." Holmes glanced at me, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "A locked-room mystery, Watson. And yet, something tells me the solution will not be found within these walls, but rather within the mind of the victim." I frowned. "You mean the chessboard?" Holmes merely smiled. He reached out and nudged a single piece forward, a white knight, then stood abruptly. "Lestrade, this is a game played long before this evening. The question is not who committed the crime, but rather who made the first move." Chapter 2. The wind howled through the gaslit streets of London as Holmes and I returned to Baker Street. Though the journey had been silent, my mind reeled with questions. a murder without a weapon, a body without a mark, and a chessboard arranged in a manner known only to the deceased and, perhaps, the killer. As I hung my coat beside the hearth, Holmes had already settled into his chair, fingers steepled, eyes half closed in thought. The room flickered with the dim glow of the fire, shadows shifting over the contours of his sharp features. "You noted the peculiar arrangement of the chess pieces, Watson?" he asked suddenly. I sighed. "I saw a game in progress, but I am no great player of chess, Holmes. What did you see?" His lips curled slightly. A move played in haste, a desperate attempt at control, and yet one that spoke of resignation rather than victory. He leaned forward. There was no struggle, no forced entry, and yet we know someone was present, which means, my dear Watson, that the game itself was the struggle. Our victim was communicating something before he died. Before I could respond, a sharp knock rapped against the door. Mrs. Hudson barely had time to announce the visitor before a man stepped inside, pale, agitated, and soaked from the evening rain. His high-collared coat was finely tailored, but bore signs of neglect. His hands twitched at his sides, betraying a nervous energy that had clearly been building for some time. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I fear I am next." Holmes regarded him coolly, gesturing towards the chair opposite. "That, sir, is a most ominous introduction. Do sit down. Watson, the brandy, if you please." Poured the drink as the man settled into the chair, his fingers gripping the armrests as though they were the last stable thing in his world. Holmes studied him in silence, his gaze moving with the precision of a scalpel, cutting through fabric, posture, hesitation. Finally, he spoke. "You arrived in London this morning by train. You intended to go elsewhere, yet found yourself here instead. You were summoned, not by letter, but by something far more urgent. And whatever it was, it has left you utterly shaken." The man flinched, his brandy sloshing slightly in the glass. How could you possibly know that?" Holmes waved a hand dismissively. "Your boots, sir, bear the distinct red dust of the southern railway platforms. Bournemouth, I'd wager. The mud, however, is not yet dry, suggesting you arrived no more than 2 hours ago. And yet you came straight to Baker Street, forgoing any intended lodging. That suggests urgency. Your coat, though fine, has been worn several days without care, implying travel plans that did not go as intended. Lastly, your right hand trembles, not from cold, but from strain. You have spent your day hesitating, torn between running and seeking help. The latter one, though only just." Our visitor stared, wide-eyed. My God! He downed the brandy. In one swift motion, Holmes tapped his fingers against the armrest. "Now, let us move past the obvious and into the relevant. Who was he?" The man exhaled, pressing his fingers to his temple. "His name was Reginald Carstairs. He was my employer, my friend, and if what you say is true, then he died playing a game of chess with his murderer." Holmes tilted his head. "Then, Mr. Jonathan Harrow. Mr. Harrow, tell us precisely why you believe you are next." Harrow swallowed hard. "Because 3 days ago, Carstairs told me something I did not understand. He said, 'It is my move, Jonathan, and I intend to resign before I lose everything.'" The words lingered in the air, Holmes's eyes darkened. He stood abruptly, turning toward the fireplace, his silhouette casting long, spindled shadows against the walls. "Resignation, Watson. A word spoken not in defeat, but in premeditation. Carstairs did not just expect his death, he accepted it." Harrow's voice wavered, and yet I do not know why, nor do I know who or what we were playing against. Holmes turned. "That, Mr. Harrow, is what we must now uncover, but tell me." He paused, gaze sharpening. This was no ordinary game, was it? Harrow hesitated. Then, softly, he spoke. It was a wager. A slow, knowing smile curled at Holmes's lips. "Ah," he murmured. "Now the board is set." Chapter 3. The hour was late when we departed Baker Street, yet neither Holmes nor I gave any thought to rest. The revelation of a wager, a game played with stakes far beyond mere pride, had set Holmes's mind ablaze. His sharp, deliberate movements as he donned his coat betrayed the intensity of his thoughts. Jonathan Harrow, still visibly shaken, hesitated at the threshold. Are we going back to Wyndham House?" he asked nervously. Holmes cast him a sidelong glance. "Would you rather remain in ignorance, Mr. Harrow?" Harrow swallowed hard, then nodded. "No, I must know the truth." We stepped into the waiting, hansom cab, the wheels clattering over the damp cobblestones as we made our way through the fog-drenched streets of London. Holmes remained silent for much of the journey, his long fingers drumming against his knee in a rhythmic pattern. It was only as we neared Wyndham House that he finally spoke. "Watson, do you recall the placement of the chess pieces on the board?" Frowned, summoning the memory. "A game in progress, midway through, I should think. You moved a knight before we left." Holmes gave a small, satisfied nod. "Yes, and an interesting move it was. Our victim played his last piece. A knight, Watson. An unusual choice in a final game, unless it held some significance beyond the match itself." I was about to inquire further when the cab came to a halt before the towering facade of Wyndham House. The gas lamps flickered weakly against the thickening fog, lending an eerie stillness to the night. Lestrade was waiting for us at the entrance, his expression one of begrudging relief. "Holmes," he said, rubbing his hands together against the cold, "I was half expecting you'd turn up again, though I don't see what more can be found. There's no weapon, no sign of struggle, and no clue as to how the man died." Holmes did not respond immediately. Instead, he stepped past Lestrade and entered the study, his keen eyes sweeping the dimly lit room as if seeing it anew. The corpse had been removed, but the chessboard remained exactly as we had left it. The pieces sat frozen in their eerie tableau, untouched by time or logic. Holmes moved to the desk, his fingers trailing lightly over the polished surface. Then, without warning, he flipped the chessboard over. I started. "Holmes, what are you?" Ignored me. With the board now resting on its face, Holmes ran his fingers along the underside, pausing suddenly. A slow smile crept over his lips. "Watson," he murmured, "what do you make of this?" I peered closer. Beneath the board, a small, nearly imperceptible indentation marred the otherwise smooth wood. A hidden compartment. Holmes pressed gently against it, and with a soft click, a narrow drawer slid open. Inside lay a single folded letter, sealed in red wax. Lestrade let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned." Holmes plucked the letter from its hiding place, breaking the wax with the flick of a finger. He unfolded the paper with deliberate care, his expression unreadable as he scanned the contents. Then, quite suddenly, his gaze sharpened. "Watson," he said, handing me the letter. "Read this aloud." I took the page, my pulse quickening as my eyes skimmed the lines. The message was written in Carstairs' own hand, yet the words were far more chilling than I had anticipated. "To whomever finds this letter, I know now that I have lost. There is no move left to make. But know this, he does not play to win. He plays to ensure there is no game at all. If you are reading this, I am already dead." The room was silent as I finished. The weight of those final words settled upon us like a thick fog. Lestrade frowned. "What in blazes does that mean?" Holmes tapped the letter thoughtfully against his palm. "It means, Lestrade, that our victim did not merely die. He was eliminated." "Eliminated?" I echoed. "Yes. Carstairs' death was not an act of vengeance, nor was it a crime of passion. It was a calculated move in a game we do not yet fully understand. But mark my words, Watson, this was not about Carstairs alone. It was about the wager he lost. Harrow, who had remained silent until now, suddenly paled. "My God!" he whispered. "Does that mean—" Holmes turned to him sharply. "It means, Mr. Harrow, that you are not merely a witness." He held up the letter. "You are the next move." Chapter 4. Jonathan Harrow swayed where he stood, the colour draining from his face. His fingers gripped the back of a chair, as though solid wood might anchor him to reality. You think I'm next?" he stammered. Holmes remained perfectly still, his piercing gaze fixed upon Harrow, as if he were a specimen beneath a microscope. "Not merely next, Mr. Harrow," he said quietly. "But perhaps the final move," Lestrade scoffed. "Now see here, Holmes, this is all getting rather dramatic. What proof do you have that the man's in danger?" Holmes flicked the letter between his fingers. "Beyond the simple fact that Carstairs himself all but named him?" His eyes flashed with something unreadable. "Tell me, Mr. Harrow, what precisely was this wager you and Carstairs were involved in?" Harrow swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked to me, then to Lestrade, before settling his gaze on Holmes. "It was a private affair," he said at last. "A matter of finance." Holmes gave a short, humourless laugh. "Ah, finance, that nebulous word which, when spoken, means nothing and yet everything. No, Mr. Harrow, I do not believe for a moment that this was a simple bet over stocks or fortunes." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You wagered something of greater value, did you not?" Harrow stiffened. His fingers twitched. I don't know what you mean." Holmes's gaze never wavered. "Perhaps you don't. But I would wager, Mr. Harrow, that Carstairs did, and it cost him his life." The words settled between us like a loaded gun, heavy with implication. Lestrade, always impatient with Holmes's subtleties, rubbed his temple. "Look here, Holmes, what exactly are you suggesting? The man played a game, he lost, and now, what? You think some mysterious figure is going around killing off the players?" "Not merely the players," Holmes murmured. "The board itself is being cleared." I frowned. "Cleared? Holmes, I fail to see—" Holmes held up a hand, cutting me off. "Watson, do you recall what I said earlier about the placement of the knight on the chessboard?" I nodded. You said it was a move played in haste, a desperate move. Exactly. And yet, chess is not merely a game of pieces. It is a game of ideas. A move is never made in isolation. It is a response to something unseen. He turned to Harrow. Tell me, what was Carstairs' last conversation with you? Harrow licked his lips, still visibly shaken. He was worried, he admitted at last. He told me he had realized something, that he had made a mistake, that he had played into someone's hands without realizing it. And then he said there was no move left, but resignation. Holmes exhaled sharply. Watson, he said, turning to me, you are a man of medicine. What do you make of a patient who resigns himself to an illness before ever exhibiting a symptom? I considered. It would suggest that he knows something the physician does not, that he has foreseen his fate. Holmes nodded. Precisely. And so it is with Carstairs. He was not merely a man who feared for his life. He was a man who knew he was already dead. A silence stretched between us. Lestrade, ever the sceptic, crossed his arms. And yet there's no murder weapon, no cause of death. Holmes tilted his head. No apparent cause of death, he corrected. But consider this. Carstairs' body bore no sign of struggle, no mark, no evidence of poison or external force. And yet he left behind a cryptic warning, a warning that suggests a game far older than mere chance. He tapped the letter. He does not play to win. He plays to ensure there is no game at all. I felt a chill. Holmes, what are you saying? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned to Harrow, his expression unreadable. Mr. Harrow, he said slowly, where were you the night Carstairs died? Harrow flinched. I was at my club, the Savile Club. I left before midnight. Can anyone confirm this? A few men there, yes, but I don't see— Good, Holmes interrupted. Because you, my dear Mr. Harrow, are in the gravest danger. And I mean to ensure you live long enough to see this through. Harrow paled further. But what am I meant to do? Holmes smiled. It was not a reassuring smile. You, sir, must do precisely what I tell you, and you must do it without question. He turned sharply on his heel, striding toward the door. Come, Watson Lestrade, there is much to do and precious little time. Where are we going? I asked, grabbing my coat. Holmes did not look back. To watch the board, Watson. The game is not yet over, and with that he vanished into the night. Chapter 5 Holmes led us swiftly through the fog-drenched streets of London, his long coat billowing as he walked with purpose. The night air was thick with dampness, and the gaslights flickered like distant fireflies, casting elongated shadows against the cobbled streets. Holmes, where are we going? I asked, struggling to match his pace. To uncover what Carstairs feared most, he answered cryptically. A man does not write his own epitaph unless he has foreseen the hand that will deliver it. Jonathan Harrow, still visibly shaken, hesitated before following. What do you mean? He asked, his voice strained. Holmes glanced at him. Tell me, Mr. Harrow, how long have you known Carstairs? 7 years, Harrow replied. We met in business, formed a partnership, and, well, we gambled together on occasion. Not in the frivolous sense, you understand. Carstairs had a mind for strategy. He treated wagers as a battle of intellect. Holmes nodded, and this particular wager, the one that cost him his life, was different, was it not? Harrow hesitated. Yes, he admitted. It was high stakes, but I don't know the details. You never told me. Holmes exhaled through his nose. That is what we must remedy. At last we arrived at our destination, the Palladium Club, a gentleman's club known for its exclusivity and, more importantly, its discreet high-stakes games. The exterior was understated, yet within, fortunes were won and lost over the course of a single evening. Holmes pushed open the heavy doors, stepping inside without hesitation. The air within was thick with tobacco smoke, and the murmurs of men gathered in dim corners, their conversations lilting between idle chatter and secretive whispers. A waiter in crisp attire approached us, but Holmes dismissed him with a wave of his hand, his eyes already scanning the room. "There," he murmured, "at the corner table, Lord Everett Bainbridge." I followed his gaze toward an older gentleman seated beneath a gaslight, his silvered hair immaculately combed, his fingers idly toying with a glass of brandy. Despite his poised demeanour, there was something calculating about his gaze, something that set me on edge. "Who is he?" I asked quietly. "A financier of some repute," Holmes answered, "but more importantly, a man who never plays a losing hand." Harrow stiffened. "You think he was involved?" Holmes tilted his head. "I know he was." Without further hesitation, Holmes strode toward Bainbridge, and before the man could react, he seated himself across from him. I followed, taking the seat beside Holmes. Harrow lingered behind us, uncertain. Bainbridge arched an eyebrow, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Mr. Holmes, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Holmes steepled his fingers. "A wager, Lord Bainbridge, one that ended in murder." The older man gave a soft chuckle. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic. And yet, if you are speaking of Reginald Carstairs, I assure you, I had no hand in his untimely demise." Holmes smiled thinly. "Ah, but you did have a hand in what led him to it, did you not?" A flicker of something crossed Bainbridge's features, a momentary crack in his composure. Holmes leaned forward slightly. "Carstairs was afraid, Lord Bainbridge. That much was evident in his final words. But what interests me more is not his fear, but what caused it. He left behind a message, one that suggests he was not merely playing a game, but being played himself." Bainbridge swirled the brandy in his glass, considering. "And what do you believe this game was, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes's voice was low, deliberate, a wager of knowledge, a contest not over wealth, but over secrets. Harrow inhaled sharply. "My God!" I frowned. "Holmes, are you saying—" "Precisely, Watson," he interrupted. "Carstairs did not gamble for mere coin. He played for information, secrets of immense value, likely gathered over years of business dealings. And he lost." Bainbridge smiled again, but it was colder this time. "A compelling theory, but without proof it remains nothing more than that, a theory." Holmes's gaze darkened. "You misunderstand me, Lord Bainbridge. I did not come seeking proof. I came because I already have it." For the first time, Bainbridge's fingers tightened around his glass. Holmes withdrew the letter we had found beneath the chessboard, placing it lightly on the table. Carstairs left behind a warning, not just for himself, but for those who followed. He realized too late that the game was unwinnable, that no matter how he played, the end was inevitable, and yet he still made a final move, a move that tells me everything I need to know. He paused. The silence stretched. Then, "You never meant for him to win, did you?" Bainbridge exhaled slowly, setting his glass down with deliberate care. "You are a dangerous man, Mr. Holmes." "And you are a man accustomed to tying up loose ends," Holmes replied. Bainbridge regarded him for a long moment. "You should walk away from this." Holmes smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I do not play to win, Lord Bainbridge. I play to understand the game." A pause. Then Bainbridge stood. "Then I pity you, Mr. Holmes." He turned, walking away without another word. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Holmes, what in heaven's name have we stepped into?" Holmes watched Bainbridge disappear into the smoke-filled corridors. "A game much older than chess, Watson. A game where men wager not money, but their lives. And I fear we have only just seen the opening move. Chapter 6 now." We left the Palladium Club in silence, the weight of our discovery pressing heavily upon us. Holmes walked at a brisk pace, his long coat billowing in the cold night air, his hands tucked deep into his pockets. The distant hum of London nightlife was drowned beneath the steady rhythm of our footsteps on the damp cobblestones. Jonathan Harrow remained close behind, his nerves worn thin. "That man, Bainbridge, he knows something," he murmured. "You saw the way he reacted, didn't you?" Holmes did not break stride. "I saw more than that, Mr. Harrow. I saw a man accustomed to control suddenly faced with the realization that his game is no longer a private one." I frowned. "But Holmes," Bainbridge walked away unshaken. "That does not strike me as a man who fears being caught." Holmes gave a small, knowing smile. "Exactly, Watson. He does not fear being caught, because in his mind there is nothing to catch." A shiver ran through me. "Then what are we dealing with?" Holmes stopped abruptly, turning to face us. The gaslight above cast deep shadows across his sharp features. "A machine, Watson. One that does not operate on the principles of crime, as you and I understand it. We are not dealing with a murderer driven by rage, greed, or even self-preservation. We are dealing with something much colder. A system designed to erase those who do not play by its rules." Before I could press him further, a loud voice cut through the night. "Mr. Holmes! Dr. Watson!" We turned to see a young constable sprinting toward us, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "What is it, man?" Lestrade snapped as the constable reached us, panting. It's another body, sir." A sudden chill ran down my spine. Holmes's gilded eyes darkened. "Where?" "The Savile Club, sir. In the card room. The same man you were asking about, Lord Everett Bainbridge, is dead." Harrow gasped. Lestrade let out a low curse. Holmes merely closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, as though the final piece of a puzzle had just fallen into place. "Come, gentlemen," he said, his voice utterly calm. "The game is accelerating." We arrived at the Savile Club within minutes, Holmes leading the charge up the grand staircase and through the mahogany doors. The staff and members were gathered in small, uneasy clusters, their hushed voices betraying fear rather than mere curiosity. The card room, normally a scene of quiet luxury, had become a crime scene. Lord Everett Bainbridge sat perfectly still at the head of the table, his cards held loosely in one hand, a glass of untouched brandy at his side. His face was eerily calm, his expression almost expectant. But there was no sign of struggle, no visible wound, and no weapon. It was Carstairs all over again. Lestrade exhaled sharply. "Bloody hell, Holmes, it's the same thing. A man sitting in a locked room, dead without a cause." Holmes moved forward, his fingers hovering just above Bainbridge's hand without touching it. He studied the positioning of the cards, the level of brandy in the glass, the way the man's body had settled into death. I swallowed hard. Another impossible crime. Holmes shook his head. "Not impossible, Watson, merely unseen." He took a long, slow breath. Then, in one sharp movement, he lifted Bainbridge's left sleeve. A single darkened puncture wound lay just above the wrist. Small, almost unnoticeable, a spot that could be mistaken for a simple bruise. Lestrade's eyes widened. "Poison?" "More than that," Holmes murmured. "A controlled execution, a method so precise that it leaves no trace but certainty." Jonathan Harrow swayed slightly. "You mean someone chose when he would die?" Holmes turned to him, his expression unreadable. "Indeed. The only question is whether Bainbridge knew he was already dead." Holmes spent the next several minutes examining Bainbridge's pockets, his belongings, even his chair. Finally, he stepped back. "There is something missing," he muttered. Lestrade frowned. "What are you on about? He's sitting right there, just like Carstairs was." "No," Holmes interrupted. "Carstairs left behind a message, a warning, cryptic though it was. Bainbridge, however, has left behind nothing." I crossed my arms. Then perhaps Bainbridge didn't expect to die. Holmes glanced at me, his eyes narrowing. "Did he not?" I hesitated. "You think he knew?" Holmes slowly turned back to Bainbridge's body, his sharp gaze moving over every detail once more. Then, quite suddenly, he leaned forward and adjusted the playing cards in the man's hand. I gasped. The cards were arranged deliberately. Traducers in a natural hand, but placed with precision. An ace of spades, held loosely between two fingers. A card that, in certain circles, was called the card of death. Holmes smiled grimly. "There is your message, Watson. Bainbridge did not simply lose. He knew the end was coming, and he chose to meet it with the only move left available to him." Lestrade swore under his breath. "Then who killed him, Holmes? And why?" Holmes straightened, adjusting his cuffs. "Bainbridge, Carstairs. They were players in something far greater than themselves, a game in which the rules were designed so that, no matter what they did, their final move would always be resignation." I frowned. "You mean someone forced them into a situation where they had no choice but to lose?" Holmes nodded. "Precisely. And now, gentlemen, we must find the one who writes the rules of this game." Harrow, who had been silent for some time, spoke softly. "But if they both knew they were doomed, why didn't they run?" Holmes glanced at him, his eyes unreadable. "Because, Mr. Harrow, it is difficult to escape a game, when you never truly understood that you were playing in the first place. A deep silence fell over the room. Holmes turned away from the body and strode toward the door. "Come, Watson. The real enemy has yet to reveal himself." He paused at the threshold, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And I intend to force his hand." Chapter 7. The carriage ride back to Baker Street was tense and silent. Holmes sat rigid, fingers pressed together beneath his chin, his expression unreadable. Lestrade, seated opposite us, watched him warily. Harrow, pale and visibly shaken, had not spoken since we left the Savile Club. I found myself staring out at the darkened streets of London, my mind churning over the events of the evening. 2 deaths, identical in their mystery. No apparent wounds, no struggle. And yet, both men had left behind a message, one in writing, the other in the cold language of a card table. I turned to Holmes. "You believe Bainbridge knew his fate, but did nothing to stop it." Holmes exhaled slowly. "He did not do nothing, Watson. He played his final move. But why? If he knew his life was in danger, why not flee? Why not—" Holmes cut me off with a raised hand. "Because, my dear fellow, you are thinking of this as a crime to be escaped. But to these men it was a game already lost." Harrow's voice was hoarse. "Then tell me, Holmes, who is playing against us?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew Bainbridge's ace of spades, turning it between his fingers. "Not who, Mr. Harrow," he murmured. "What?" Harrow stiffened. "What do you mean?" Holmes's lips pressed into a thin line. "Watson," he said without looking at me, "remind me, what is the one constant in both deaths?" I considered. The lack of visible cause, the calm expressions, the cryptic messages left behind. Holmes nodded, and yet something greater links them, something unseen. He turned his sharp gaze on Harrow. "Mr. Harrow, who introduced you to Carstairs?" Harrow blinked. "What? Carstairs was your business partner? But was he always? Think carefully. Who first arranged your meeting?" Harrow frowned. I believe it was a man named Felix Mercer." Holmes's expression did not change, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. "Felix Mercer." He leaned back. "And tell me, Mr. Harrow, where is he now?" Harrow hesitated. I don't know. I haven't seen him in over a year." Holmes steepled his fingers. "Curious, is it not?" Lestrade sighed. "Holmes, are you implying this Mercer fellow is behind all this?" Holmes shook his head. "No, Lestrade. I am implying that Felix Mercer may be our next body." When we arrived at Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson greeted us with a look of deep concern. "Mr. Holmes, a letter arrived for you not an hour ago," she said, handing him a folded envelope. "It was delivered by hand. The gentleman said it was urgent." Holmes took the envelope and held it to the gaslight, his expression unreadable. Then, with a flick of his fingers, he broke the wax seal and unfolded the page. His face remained impassive, as his eyes scanned the words. But I saw it, the tightening of his jaw, the barest hint of tension in his grip. I stepped forward. "Holmes!" Fuitium handed me the note. It contained only 4 words. "The last move is yours." A shiver ran down my spine. What does this mean? Holmes exhaled slowly. It means, Watson, that we are no longer merely observers in this game. Lestrade frowned. Who sent it? Holmes studied the handwriting. The signature is missing, but the message is clear. He turned to Harrow. You asked who we were playing against, Mr. Harrow. I now have your answer. Harrow swallowed hard. Who? Holmes's voice was calm, but his eyes were alight with something sharp and dangerous. The true player, the one who has been orchestrating every move, is the one we have not yet seen. Someone with power, patience, and a design far beyond what we imagined. I clenched my fists. And where do we find him? Holmes smiled faintly. He has already found us, Watson. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows along the walls. Lestrade exhaled sharply. And what do we do now? Holmes rose to his feet. We finish the game. Chapter 8. The room was silent save for the steady ticking of the mantelpiece clock. Holmes stood before the fire, his gaze locked on the note he had just received. The words were simple, yet chilling. The last move is yours. Jonathan Harrow swallowed hard, his fingers gripping the arms of his chair. Holmes, what does this mean? Who sent this? Holmes turned the note over, studying it with an unreadable expression. A challenge, Mr. Harrow, and a declaration. Our opponent has finally shown his hand, if only for a moment. Lestrade scoffed. And who exactly is our opponent, Holmes? You've been leading us in circles, but I don't see a bloody suspect in sight. Holmes smiled faintly. That is because we have not been playing by his rules, Lestrade, but now we shall force him to play by ours. I frowned. Holmes, you keep speaking in riddles. If you know who is behind this, why not act? Holmes turned to face me. Because, Watson, there is still one final move left to make, and I intend to let our adversary make it first. Lestrade crossed his arms. And how do you plan to do that? Holmes's smile did not fade. He picked up the ace of spades from Bainbridge's hand, turning it between his fingers. By inviting him to checkmate himself. Holmes spent the next hour drafting a letter, sealing it with wax and handing it to a courier. The instructions were simple. Deliver this to Felix Mercer, he said. Jonathan Harrow paled. You think Mercer is behind all this? Holmes shook his head. No, Mr. Harrow. But Mercer was the bridge between Carstairs and Bainbridge. He is the missing piece in our puzzle, and if our opponent has been watching us, as I suspect he has, then the mere mention of Mercer's name will be enough to provoke a response. Lestrade frowned. And what if it doesn't? Holmes slipped on his coat. Then we shall force his hand another way. He turned to me. Come, Watson. There is someone we must visit before the night is through. The hansom cab rattled through the near-empty streets of London, the mist thickening in the gaslight glow. Holmes sat motionless beside me, his face unreadable. Where are we going, Holmes? I finally asked. Holmes exhaled softly. To the one man who might know the truth, though he will not part with it willingly. I frowned. And who is that? Holmes turned his gaze toward me, Lord Everett Bainbridge's brother. The name sent a chill through me. You believe he was involved? Holmes smiled thinly. I believe he understood the game his brother played. Whether he was part of it remains to be seen. When we arrived at Bainbridge House, the butler greeted us with a wary expression. "My lord is not expecting visitors at this hour," he said. Holmes handed him a card. "Tell him Sherlock Holmes is here." Minutes later, we were ushered into a dimly lit study where Lord Charles Bainbridge awaited us. He was a man of considerable stature, his silvering hair neatly combed, his expression one of forced indifference. "Mr. Holmes," he said coolly, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" Holmes studied him for a moment. "Your brother is dead, Lord Bainbridge." The man's fingers twitched against the armrest, but his face remained impassive. "So I have been told. A tragic loss. Tragic indeed," Holmes murmured. "And yet you do not seem surprised." Lord Bainbridge exhaled. "My brother was a man of dangerous habits. He surrounded himself with men who knew the weight of a wager. I have long feared that one day he would wager something too valuable to lose." Holmes tilted his head. "And what exactly was that?" The lord hesitated. Then softly he said, "His life." I felt a chill. Holmes leaned forward. "Tell me, Lord Bainbridge, did your brother ever speak of a man known as Felix Mercer?" Bainbridge's jaw tightened. "No." Holmes studied him for a long moment. Then suddenly he smiled. "Ah," he murmured, "then we do have something to fear." Lord Bainbridge's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Holmes rose, adjusting his coat. "I mean, my lord, that if your brother did not know Mercer, then the man behind all of this is far more dangerous than I anticipated." He turned toward the door. "Come, Watson, the game is nearly at its end." When we returned to Baker Street, we found a new letter waiting for us. Holmes opened it without hesitation, his sharp eyes scanning the page. Then, slowly, he handed it to me. It contained only 2 words. "Your move," Lestrade swore. "Blast it, Holmes! This villain is taunting us." Holmes smiled, slipping the letter into his pocket. "Indeed he is, Lestrade, but what he does not yet realize—" He turned toward the window, gazing out at the fog-choked city below. "Is that I have already won." Chapter 9 Holmes stood motionless at the window of 221B Baker Street, staring out into the fog-bound streets below. The dim glow of the gas lamps barely penetrated the mist, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed almost alive. The note lay on the table beside him. "Your move!" Lestrade paced the room with mounting frustration. "Blast it, Holmes! We're no closer to catching this villain than we were before. You've uncovered a dozen riddles, but not one man to put in chains." Holmes turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "On the contrary, Lestrade, we are closer than ever." Lestrade threw up his hands. "Then tell me, who is he?" Holmes exhaled softly. "That, my dear Lestrade, is precisely what we shall confirm tonight." Jonathan Harrow, who had been silent until now, spoke up. His voice was strained, his fingers gripping the armrest of his chair. "Holmes, you believe this man, whoever he is, has been watching us?" Holmes nodded. "Undoubtedly. Every move we have made has been anticipated. The deaths of Carstairs and Bainbridge were not merely executions, they were demonstrations." Harrow paled. "Then, am I still in danger?" Holmes studied him for a moment. "Not for much longer, Mr. Harrow, but in order to ensure your safety, we must make our final move, and we must do so tonight." Lestrade frowned. "And what precisely do you have in mind?" Holmes glanced at the clock. We returned to Wyndham House. A chill ran through me. The scene of the first crime? "Yes, Watson," Holmes murmured, "for that is where our opponent expects us to be, and that is where I intend to end this game." We arrived at Wyndham House just past midnight. The city hushed in eerie stillness. The great manor loomed before us, its windows dark, its facade shrouded in mist. The air was thick with the weight of unresolved mysteries. Holmes stepped forward without hesitation, pushing open the heavy doors. The house had been abandoned since Carstairs' death. Yet, as we crossed the threshold, I could not shake the feeling that we were not alone. Holmes turned to Lestrade. "You and your men will remain outside. Watson and I shall go in alone." Lestrade stiffened. "Now see here, Holmes. Trust me," Holmes interrupted softly. "This game has been played between two minds. If we bring an army, our opponent will not show his hand. But if he believes he has the upper hand—" Lestrade hesitated. Then reluctantly he nodded. "Be careful, Holmes." Holmes gave a small smile. "Carefulness is a virtue, Lestrade. Tonight, however, we play for certainty." He turned to me. "Come, Watson, we have a visitor waiting." We stepped into the study, where the first body had been found. The room was unchanged. The chessboard still sat on the desk, frozen in its last game. The heavy curtains were drawn, casting deep shadows across the space. Holmes exhaled softly. "He is already here." A voice drifted from the darkness. "Bravo, Mr. Holmes." I spun around, my hand instinctively going to my revolver. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, dressed immaculately in a dark suit. His face was pale, his expression one of quiet amusement. Holmes smiled faintly. "Felix Mercer, I presume?" The man inclined his head. "And you are precisely as I expected, Mr. Holmes. Methodical, brilliant, predictable." Holmes chuckled. "You flatter me." Mercer stepped forward. "You have come seeking answers, and I have come to give them to you. For you see, Mr. Holmes, you were never meant to win this game." I tensed. "You admit to the murders?" Mercer sighed. "Dr. Watson, you disappoint me. There were no murders. There were moves. Carstairs, Bainbridge, they played. They lost. That is all." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And yet you ensured their fates, did you not?" Mercer smiled. "I merely facilitated the inevitable." Holmes took a step closer. "Then tell me, Mercer, who truly holds the power in this game? Who is the real player?" For the first time Mercer hesitated. Then slowly he said, "The game is older than you realize, Mr. Holmes. Carstairs and Bainbridge were merely pawns. Even I am only a knight, moving at another's command." A chill ran down my spine. "Then who?" Mercer smiled faintly. "Do you truly wish to know?" Holmes nodded. "Knowledge, Mercer, is the only wager I am willing to place." Mercer exhaled. "Then I shall tell you, Mr. Holmes." He leaned forward, his voice a whisper. "The man you seek has already won." A sharp crack rang through the air. Mercer staggered backward, clutching his chest. Blood bloomed against his crisp shirt. His eyes widened, more in surprise than pain. Holmes lunged forward, catching him before he fell. "Mercer!" The dying man coughed, his grip tightening on Holmes's sleeve. His lips parted, but only one word escaped. "Checkmate." Then he went still. I spun, my revolver drawn, but the shooter was gone. A shattered window, a retreating shadow vanishing into the mist, Lestrade and his men stormed in. "What happened?" Holmes straightened slowly, his gaze still locked on Mercer's lifeless form. "The true player," he murmured, "has made his final move." I shuddered. "And what does that mean, Holmes?" Holmes exhaled. "It means, Watson, that we have not solved a crime." He turned toward the shattered window, his voice distant. "We have merely glimpsed the edge of a much larger game." Chapter 10. The room fell into a suffocating silence as Mercer's lifeless body slumped in Holmes's grasp. His final word, checkmate, hung in the air like an unfinished sentence, a riddle with no answer. Lestrade cursed under his breath. "Damn it, Holmes! Who shot him?" Holmes carefully laid Mercer's body on the floor, his sharp eyes flickering toward the shattered window. The mist outside had swallowed all traces of the shooter, leaving nothing behind but the faint whisper of the wind. They anticipated his confession, Holmes murmured, and silenced him before he could give it. Lestrade knelt beside the body, inspecting the wound. A clean shot, straight to the heart. This was a professional kill. Holmes nodded absently, still staring at the window. I could see the calculations forming behind his piercing gaze, the invisible connections between every move made in this dark game. Jonathan Harrow, still pale and shaken, stepped forward. Then Mercer was just another pawn. Holmes turned to him, his expression unreadable. "No, Mr. Harrow, he was the knight." Harrow swallowed hard. "Then who is the king?" Holmes exhaled slowly. "The one who never moves until the very end," I frowned. "You mean Mercer was working under someone else's command?" "Precisely, Watson." Holmes gestured toward the body. Mercer was many things. A manipulator, a tactician, a man who played the game well. But he was not the one in control. He himself admitted as much before his death. "The man you seek has already won." A chill ran down my spine. "Then we've lost?" Holmes gave me a small, knowing smile. "Not yet." Lestrade sent his men to search the grounds for any trace of the shooter, but I knew it was futile. Whoever had orchestrated Mercer's death was not a man who left loose ends. Holmes paced the study, his fingers interlocked behind his back. Every now and then his eyes flicked toward the chessboard that had remained untouched on the desk since Carstairs' death. At last he stopped. "Watson," he said suddenly, "do you recall the final move of Carstairs' game?" I blinked. "The knight. You said it was a desperate move." Holmes nodded. "Yes, a move made not for victory, but for survival." He approached the chessboard and picked up the white knight, turning it between his fingers. His expression darkened. Mercer was a knight, Watson, a man given orders and carrying them out to perfection. But even knights can only move in restricted patterns. Their vision is limited. He placed the knight back onto the board. "But a king, Watson." He met my gaze. "A king never moves unless he must." Jonathan Harrow inhaled sharply. "Then the real mastermind, the king, has never been seen." Holmes smiled thinly. "Exactly." Lestrade scoffed. And how do you plan to catch a man who never reveals himself?" Holmes turned to the broken window. "By forcing his hand." He strode to Mercer's body and searched his pockets, his movements quick and precise. After a moment, he extracted a single playing card, much like the one Bainbridge had left behind. It was another ace of spades. Holmes turned it over. There was writing on the back, "Bishop takes knight." A silence fell over the room. I inhaled sharply. "Bishop, that's a chess move." Holmes's lips curled into a grim smile. "More than that, Watson. It is a signature." Lestrade frowned. "You mean the mastermind calls himself the bishop?" Holmes studied the card. "Not just a name, a role. In chess, the bishop moves diagonally, striking from unexpected angles. It is not a piece that wins the game outright, but one that ensures the opponent is always cornered, always reacting, always losing." Harrow ran a shaking hand through his hair. "So, this bishop is the real enemy?" Holmes nodded. "And he has been watching us from the very beginning." We returned to Baker Street in the early hours of the morning, exhausted but restless. Holmes had barely spoken during the ride, his mind working furiously through the tangled threads of the case. As we stepped into the sitting room, I slumped into my chair, rubbing my temple. "Holmes, if this bishop orchestrated everything, how do we find him?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he crossed to the fireplace and retrieved the letters we had received throughout the case. The taunts, the invitations, the challenge. "The last move is yours. Your move." Holmes turned to us. "The bishop is not hiding, Watson. He is waiting." Lestrade raised an eyebrow. "Waiting for what?" Holmes exhaled. "For me?" Harrow let out a hollow laugh. Then he's already won." Holmes shook his head. "No, Mr. Harrow. He thinks he has won. But there is one thing he does not yet understand." I frowned. "What's that?" Holmes smirked. "I never play to win, Watson. I play to understand the game." A sharp knock echoed through Baker Street. We all froze. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Ah!" He stepped toward the door. He opened it, and there, standing, in the dim glow of the gaslight, was a man in a dark coat, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. He smiled. "Mr. Holmes," he said, "shall we finish our game?" Holmes returned the smile. "Indeed, Bishop." The door clicked shut behind them. I never learned the full details of what transpired behind that closed door. Holmes returned an hour later, his expression unreadable. He said nothing, only poured himself a glass of brandy and stared into the fire. Lestrade pressed him for answers. He gave none. Jonathan Harrow left London soon after, seeking refuge in a quieter life. He wanted no part in the games of powerful men. As for Mercer's killer, the true bishop, his name never appeared in the papers. There was no arrest, no trial, no justice, as we understand it, only silence. And yet I could not shake the feeling that the game had not ended. One evening, as Holmes and I sat by the fire, I finally spoke. "Holmes, did we truly stop him?" Holmes exhaled, his gaze distant. "No, Watson, we merely survived him." I shuddered. "Will he return?" Holmes gave a small, knowing smile. "The bishop, Watson? No, he has made his final move." A pause. Then softer. But the game, my dear friend, the game is never over. The fire crackled, and the shadows flickered against the walls, and in that moment I knew I would never fully understand the depths of Sherlock Holmes's mind. The end